Hey, guys. Hey, Steve.
Hey, Patty, how are you?
How are you?
Good, good, good to see you.
You too.
Well, how can
Give everybody a minute to get in. Does anybody have any great stories they want to share while we're moving people in?
Oh,
What do you got, Kathy?
yeah.
What have you got?
Yeah, what I'm going through now. Well, one mistake I've learned, I haven't been asking for the tenants to provide renters to have renters insurance.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, you have to.
I haven't done that. We did have a fire.
A fire?
Sure.
Okay.
And we repaired it, paid for it and everything, and then things kind of fell apart. We had to evict them. And so now we're stuck with, unpaid rent, the fire bill. He said he kept promising it he was gonna pay and never did it.
Did you have lost business insurance? Lost business income insurance as part of your liability policy? Did you put it through your own policy?
I don't know. I'm gonna have to find out if my husband has that.
Okay. I mean, a lot of policies have lost income. So most of the time the landlord gets the lost rents.
All right. Yeah, we never have any luck with garnishments. Never.
We are.
I've pretty much given up on that.
We are having luck with garnishments, but not always, but
Who do
hey,
you
Gail.
use?
We use asset
Hi, can you
recovery.
hear me, Bob?
And it's a long process, and we don't really get many updates, but I was looking up one of my personal entities in the Portsmouth court records this week to see if we had a court date yet for when we had filed. And I see that asset recovery has 3 garnishment hearings for me, for my old tenants this month. So they do actively pursue them. Not that they always are able to collect, but we do collect enough to make it worthwhile.
All right.
And they don't charge you anything unless they collect.
Right.
So, okay, today we are going to talk about mistakes people make. I'm still having to admit people here. And we have a really nice, I can't find my phone. We have a really nice calendar set up for 2023. Let me see if I can find it in my email real quick. So this is tentative, but we're looking at taking a break for December like we always do. Talking about the state of the market for January, which will be very timely. Now we're post-election too, but state of the real estate market and the rental market. Short-term versus long-term rentals for February. Getting out of a tight spot with, when you have just like Kathy's fire, a disastrous scenario. What can you do to come out of it and mitigate your losses? Fair housing and screening. I feel like we have testers galore right now, and we have so much fraud going on. That's April. May, annual law update. June, AI and other technology for real estate. And if anyone feels like they have expertise in any of these areas we've discussed, we'd love you to volunteer to help. We're looking at taking a break for July, talking about exit strategy
Saturday
in August. Somebody needs to mute.
He's got a doctor's appointment earlier that week. Would be okay.
Hold on one second.
So anyway,
Who is this?
because they won't let us do anything here with alcohol, obviously. So
See if I can figure out who to mute. don't know. So we have a great lineup, so we're hoping to have a strong agenda set up for 2012. So we want to get right into our topic today, or does anyone have anything else they want to put on the table? All right. Let me see if I can share my screen with you. I'm going to try to minimize this a little bit so I can still see if people are jumping on. Hold on, let me see if I. Okay, but I don't want to do that because I want to be able to see you. No. Hold on, how do I get back to where I was? Does anybody know here? I can close it and open it back up again. Let me close it and open it back up again. Hi, Shirley Flummerfelt.
Hey Patty, good morning.
Good morning.
Oh, it's not morning there.
Right. I'm still in this weird thing. I don't know how to get out of this slide master. How do I do that? Close it. Okay. I'm just afraid that we're going to have people trying to get in and I can't see them when I have the presentation pulled up. I'm not sure how to fix that.
Notification at the top, like even if you're in full screen presentation mode, you should get a notification at the top of your Zoom when someone is trying to admit to.
Yeah, but my screen was going over top of it.
All the notifications.
You know what I mean? It just, yeah. So we'll see if, I do have a little corner here. We'll see if it pops up. But okay, so we'll just go in here. So we're gonna talk about a whole bunch of mistakes. We'll categorize them to try to make it easy to go through, and we're gonna kind of zip, but feel free to pipe in if you have a question. First one is not learning and staying current on your state landlord tenant laws. And I can't tell you how many times I get phone calls about a weird landlord situation when the answer is right in our Virginia landlord tenant law. Our law is written so simply, it's about 60 pages, And you can, if you go on the state website, you can download it as a PDF. It's a quick read, and weird scenarios a lot of times are specified right in the law as to what we're supposed to do. For instance, if a tenant dies in your property, Virginia landlord tenant law tells us exactly step by step what we need to do. If you think you're not sure if your tenant is out, I saw in one of the Facebook groups this morning, a landlord was saying that she went to a property and it looks like the tenant's moved out. Well, we can't just go in Virginia, we can't just go and change the locks. If we do that without following the proper course of action, it's a $5,000 fine. Ask me how I know. So we have to follow the rules for what the law says for tenant abandonment, which is very, very specifically written. So staying current on top of your laws and just knowing them once a year or so, I read them. And if I have something weird, I always go straight to the law. So we do an annual update in our group, and a lot of groups do, but just, going and reading the laws for your particular business is really important, and something I find a lot of people just don't do. So put that on your list. Not learning and staying on top of current fair housing laws. And again, we try to provide education about that as often as we can. The city of Norfolk provides education on that. Our state provides education on fair housing. And it's just such a litigious area. Being in my business, in the property management business, because I'm higher volume than most in terms of applicants and declining people and holding people accountable for things they're responsible for, I am called a racist at least twice a month, which just drives me bonkers because I never, ever discriminate. And people are very, very, very litigious today. So we have to be ultra cautious and make sure we're following the laws. I mean, especially in Virginia, we have a lot of tenant rights groups that are out here testing. And I mean, even as simple as the phone call that says, do you take Section 8? If you don't answer that in the right way, you could get in trouble. So depending on how many properties you own. So that's important. I try to follow the state fair housing violations. So I'm just on the state licensing list to get updates. So when the state board is having fair housing cases heard, if it's anything remotely local, or if I can see it, I try to read the case, because by reading about different cases and what people are getting in trouble for, it helps us know what not to do. Like the lady in Richmond who got in trouble for discouraging someone with kids from renting a second-story apartment. That was a big no-no, and our state forced her to sell all of her rentals because it prohibited her from renting for 7 years. So the penalties are really, really strict. So that's important. And we are going to have a fair housing session this year. Why am I not going down? Not joining industry association. So you guys are in one. We all get together, and typically the people who participate in their industry events are not the people violating the laws. But a couple other groups, NARPM is a group that stands for National Association of Residential Property Managers. It's sort of the equivalent of being a realtor to property management. It's a nationwide industry focused on education and also lobbying. And they changed their rules this year to allow non-licensed people to join. So landlords can now join NARPM. We do have a local, it's called Southeast Hampton Roads NARPM group that meets once a month. And it is a group that you would be eligible to join. Then we have another strong group is the American Apartment Owners Association. They do a lot of lobbying. And those two groups share lobbyists, so they do a lot of lobbying together. I've not attended that, but they have some great education opportunities. So depending on which one fits your schedule better, you might like one better than the other. The majority of people in NARPM are going to be mostly agents, a lot of vendors. They have a strong vendor participation. And most of the people in AAOA are going to be more large commercial landlords, but we are able to join both and participate in all their resources and education. I don't know what that one was. I didn't put it in. Another one, waiting until you have a problem developed to develop a relationship with an attorney. Attorneys charge very different fees in the state of Virginia, in our market specifically. I see fees, and you can see what people are charging if you go on the General District Court website and just look up a day of cases and open unlawful detainer cases, and you can see what the attorneys are charging in the legal box of the case after the determination is made. And you'll see law firms are charging anywhere from $250 to $1,800 to do an unlawful detainer case. Some of them are the low volume attorneys that don't focus just on landlord tenant are charging hourly rates. Some of them are charging a fee every time they go to court. Your higher volume firms are not doing that. They typically have a set fee. And if you use them regularly, if you are their client, typically the fees, as their fees increase, you're grandfathered in and the fees don't increase. So having even if you don't have any landlord tenant work, create a relationship by having them review your lease and getting on their client list so that you have a relationship with an attorney. We have some really, really good ones in our market. So questions on that? Okay, we're going to talk about buildings now. One suggestion I have is leaving your name and number with at least one neighbor at all of your properties. While we don't encourage neighborhood battles, and I don't really get involved with people tattling or neighborhood disputes that should be solved by knocking on the door and talking to your neighbor. It's always nice to have insider information when you're not physically in your property. You're like Shirley, you're now living in a different state than your rental property. So I had a scenario one time where I had people squatting in a yard with the tenant was allowing it. The tenant had illegal people living in the house and physically living in the yard with a tent. And I found that out because a neighbor across the street kept me up to date on everything that happened at the property. So you never know what information they'll share. But it can save you trips to a property if you have contact with someone. If you get weird information, hey, have you seen my tenant? Have you seen a car in the driveway the last month? Because I haven't been able to reach them. Always good to have contact with a neighbor. Installing wood laminate. We are seeing houses still. Wood laminate is really out, guys. Nobody's using it for flips, for rentals, for anything anymore because it is about as durable as carpet. It just doesn't last. And you can get it really, really cheap, but you're always better off going with LV, the luxury vinyl plate now, and that's what everyone's using. Wood laminate, just you have it in your property, when it deteriorates, which it will, it's time to move on. We don't consider that a viable product anymore. Another mistake is not using washable paint and flat paint. The painter's default paint is always going to be flat paint because it's what most people use and it looks prettiest on a wall. It hides the imperfections in the wall. But you will only ever get one tenant out of a flat paint. It just shows everything. It's not washable. If you take a magic eraser to it, it takes the paint right off the wall. So you have to really be careful if you're not painting yourself, if you're hiring a painter, to specify that you want at least a satin finish, something that has a little bit of a sheen so it's washable. Otherwise, you just spend your normal wear and tear is way too short, and tenants will never be liable for any paint because non-washable paint is not, it has a very short shelf life. Under or over rehabbing, I've got one of the owners right now who we manage a property for her in Courthouse Estates, and she doesn't treat her rental like a business. And dishwasher broke. We were going to put in a dishwasher. She had to shop for a dishwasher, and they significantly upgraded, put a very high-end dishwasher in a rental house that she's never going to live in again. It's just, financially, if you're in the business to be a business, I'm not saying be a slumlord, but you want to choose things that make sense. And people don't expect a Taj Mahal when they're renting. So we want to be careful that we're not over rehabbing and doing more than we need to do to get things rent ready. Not using a landlord lock system. And a lot of people still just go and every time they change tenants or buy a property, they go and buy new hardware and put it in. And you don't have to do that anymore. If you buy good quality hardware, you put it on once, and you can change the keys between tenants without changing hardware. So what we're using, what I'm using in my company is landlordlocks.com. It allows us to take just the core and we take it out, and we have a series of 23 different codes. And we, in 10 minutes can change the whole house. There's also a system you can use, the quick locks. People use those at Home Depot. What I don't like about those is that, one, they don't say do not duplicate on them. So your tenants can have as many keys as they want, which makes it easy for them to move extra people in your property. And also, you still have to carry around, if you have 20 rentals, you still have to carry around 20 keys. Whereas the system, if you use a system where you swap out the cores, you can have a master key system. So we only have one key that we carry around, even if we have lots of locks, different lock codes on the properties. So using a landlord lock system will save you money over the long run. We have started not putting locking handles on properties. So we put the deadbolt and then a pass-through handle. And that has significantly lowered our number of lockouts, people calling because they're locked out, because they have to have the key in order to lock the house when they leave. We also provide tenants with an extra key. So we give them one key per adult, one key per teenager, and then one extra, and tell them to please give it to a trusted family, friend, neighbor, or put it in their car glove box. Do something so that if they get locked out, you don't have to be the person they call. So.
What I got, Rosa? Fucking 4-piece bone.
Another thing is not budgeting for your long-term updates and replacements. And I've got a landlord right now. He's an older gentleman, really nice little Virginia Beach house, Windsor Woods, but it is so dated, ugly laminate in the kitchen, wood paneling, wood built-ins, all unpainted. And he is so resistant to updating it. And, and so now he's doing it. He had a tenant leave. We just took over the property, and he's having to spend a significant amount of money because he didn't do a little bit over time. It is so much easier financially to do a little bit over time than to have to do an entire rehab on a rental property. So by planning and budgeting and doing things, sometimes before they're needed, just so that you aren't doing an entire property all at once. Financially, it helps and makes sense. Not knowing your inspection requirements. And in our area, Norfolk is the only city that doesn't have a required rental inspection program. All of our other cities do. And mostly they're the same. They have a little bit of differences in terms of smoke detectors. Virginia Beach doesn't require one per bedroom. The other cities do. We just make them all the same, put one in each bedroom. But inspectors are so darn picky, especially lately. My husband just said inspector made him go out in the yard and pick up sticks yesterday. You know, and I mean, leaves are falling every single day, and yet they're making us rake leaves when we just raked them 2 weeks ago for the last inspection. So, I mean, getting to know your inspectors, it doesn't always help because we know the inspectors are still picky, but you knowing the inspection requirements also just helps you get properties rent ready. I'm going to talk about leases. By raise of hand, how many people have vacancies right now? It's tough. It is tough to have a vacancy in the winter. In our area, people don't choose to move over the holidays and in the winter months. We're denying 95% of our applications right now. Almost all of them are being pushed out of other people's properties. They're problem tenants. So, you know, most people assume that most people default to a 12-month lease. So if they're putting someone in a property now, they're going to have a November 30th expiration date next year. Well, that's going to cause you to be in a winter turn forever. And it's going to cause the tenant to have to move over the holidays forever. So there's no rule that says you have to have a 12-month lease. So we put right in our ads that we don't expire leases between the months of February and March. And when the tenants apply, we ask them what would their ideal lease ending date be, so that they know up front. If we're leasing now, we're going to be putting them in a lease that is 16, 17 months because we want it to expire after March, ideally. I mean, it doesn't always work. We just got somebody that we moved in literally 2 weeks ago, and we got military notice that he's being deployed right now, dated today. So it doesn't always work. I mean, people do move. We do evictions, and, you know, you buy properties in the winter. But setting that lease expiration date, even when you are leasing in the winter, really helps. Another thing is staggering your lease expiration dates. So again, the lease terms can be anything the landlord and the tenant agree on. So if you have multiple rental properties, it's most ideal if all of your leases expire in a different month. So put your rent roll together, and when you're advertising this property in the winter or whenever, it doesn't even have to be in the winter, whenever you're advertising it, know upfront when you want your lease ending expiration date to be. You can put that right in your ad so that you're staggering your leases, especially within a building if you have an apartment building, but you can do it for your whole portfolio so that you minimize your chance of having multiple vacancies at one time. Just about minimizing your risk. Okay, trust me, tenants are okay with it. You know, most tenants prefer to be moving in the months that are most convenient for you as well. So tenants are happy with it. Again, thinking you have to have 12-month leases, we address that with a winter leave. Leases can be any number of months the landlord and the tenant agree to, and tenants have no problem, especially when you explain the reason. You know, I know you're moving in November, but isn't it a really terrible time to be moving? Would you like what we're going to do for you is we're going to give you a one-time lease reset date so that you don't have to be stuck moving over Thanksgiving break ever again. Well, let's set a date in the spring for you. And they love it. They're so happy with that. So, and it's best for you. Another mistake, I think, is moving is very expensive for tenants. And when they move in the middle of the month and have a little prorated payment to make, and then they have a full lease payment due 2 weeks later, they oftentimes struggle to have all that money available. So another option, and you can advertise this right in your ad, full month is required at move-in, regardless of the day of move-in. And then the prorated amount will be due the first of the following month. And again, that's beneficial for the tenant because they're already counting on having that full month when they move in. And then to have a lower amount due in the second month is a big relief for them. It sets them up for financial success. So, and you just write that into your lease, easy peasy. Another thing, if you're using a property manager, make sure that the leases they're using identify you or your LLC as the landlord and not the property manager. I had a call yesterday from another local property manager who's having a mold issue he just wanted to consult about. And his lease identifies his firm as the landlord, even though his firm does not own the property. So, I mean, it is legal to do that. I don't personally think it's proper to do that. It does make it hard for you if you want to leave the property management company or you want to sell the property. And it also, if a judgment is obtained, the judgment is then owned by the property management company, not the landlord, which I also don't think is proper. So the most proper way is to have your lease in your, the name of, it should match whoever owns the property. So whether it's an individual name or an LLC name, the lease should tie back to the tax record. And then if you're using a property manager, the property manager is still going to be named in the lease, but only as agent to the owner. Okay, so they're licensed by your contract to act on your behalf to enforce the lease and negotiate the lease, but they're not party to the lease. The landlord and the tenant should be party to the lease. In your leases, make tenants responsible for the things you want them responsible for. Pest control, our law in Virginia does require that the landlord mitigate if there are pests, but it doesn't say that we can't hold the tenant liable if they caused the issue. So write it right into your lease. What we do is guarantee the place will be pest free for 30 days. And when I'm saying pests, I really mean bugs, because rodents would be a landlord requirement because somehow they're getting in through holes, which the landlord has to seal up. But so we're mostly talking bugs here. But pest control, broken glass, the cost of lost keys, we charge $20 for a lost key. Any damage caused by the tenant. So, I mean, you can specifically put all the plumbing issues, whatever you want, but put it in the lease and make it clear that the tenant is responsible for that. If there's, a shoot up and there's broken glass, the tenant's insurance will cover that, not the owner. In Virginia, we're not required to have a grace period, but most landlords are still putting a grace period in their leases. You may, if you want to, if you are feeling generous and you just want to give tenants an extra amount of time, but essentially that's just a different due date. Essentially, if you give a 5-day grace period, you're just saying the rent due date is on the 5th. We don't have to do that in Virginia. Your rent can be due on the 1st or whatever day you want and late on the 2nd. In which case you could send your notices. We still wait to send our notices on the 6th, but you could send them on the 2nd if you wanted to. So having a grace period in our state is optional. And you might want to, make an exception for somebody on Social Security who gets paid on the 3rd, but you can still write into your lease that it's due on the 1st, late on the 2nd. Which just saves you time. If you have to get somebody out, it just allows you to do it faster. Also helps you with your cash flow. People just have to get used to doing it. Another thing we need to do in the application process up front is have our tenants identify if they are or are not in the military in your lease. And you need to do that because if we end up having to take a person to court, whether they're military or not, we have to tell the courts whether or not we know they're in the military and how we know that. And having it identified in your lease makes it really easy. So you need to know, most important, you want to know if they're not military, because it's easier for us to sue people who are not military. And if you don't know, or it's unknown, then you're going to have to follow the law allowances for military members, which is really going to slow your process down. So have it and put it in writing, so it can be clear to the court if it's necessary. Here's one that I learned this last week. I was in court with Mike Hips from Asset Recovery, and he said, we were leaving, we're in the parking lot, and he said, oh, by the way, I noticed something on your lease. And it didn't matter in my case, we won the case, but he said, if legal aid were involved, this might be an issue. The lease we had was dated in, I think 2023. And the tenant's rights and responsibility was an older version. We hadn't used the most current tenant's rights and responsibility with our lease. I didn't realize that the state is updating that every single year. The latest one right now is 2024. So we had just had it as a form in our lease, and we're using the same one. And, knock on wood, it hasn't caused us any issue. But so every single year you have to go out and get the updated rights and responsibility from the Virginia Housing and Development VHDA website. If you just search Virginia tenants rights and responsibilities, it'll take you right there. But you want to make sure that you're using the proper form, the most recent one, just before your lease creation date. Otherwise, somebody who you're suing, who has an attorney or is using legal aid, they could get your lease not thrown out, but you would have to redisclose that to the tenant, and then you're going to lose a month in your process.
You have to give that each year.
Oh, okay.
Managing the tenant relationship. One thing you want to avoid is picking up rent at the property. It's just dangerous these days. One, it's unnecessary. There are so many different ways for tenants to pay rent. And, we just don't get paid enough to do that. And it's not always safe. I have one of the PMI offices in Tennessee last two years ago. And this was a maintenance person that went out to a property, but they were mistaken by the next door neighbor as they thought it was his wife's, someone she was cheating with, and he got shot and killed. Just a maintenance guy. I mean, people are volatile these days. People are crazy. And so just, don't put yourself in a precarious situation, especially with an angry tenant. So picking up rent at properties, old fashioned, don't do it. It's just not safe. Not doing periodic inspections. And you should be doing at least an annual inspection. The state requires us to do an annual smoke alarm certification. You can do that yourself, or you can hire a company to do it. But while you're there doing your inspection, some of the things you want to just be looking for: open the cabinets. Do you see any evidence of pets? If they are allowed a pet, that's fine and dandy. But I was at a property the other day, and there was a big bag of dog food out on the front porch, and they don't have a dog. So, the tenant saw me taking a picture of it, and he came out and said, oh, no, that just blew up on the grass. So we're using it to dump grease in. Come on. People think we're really dumb. Another thing you can do is count toothbrushes. An indication of how many people are living in the household are how many active toothbrushes are in the toothbrush holder. Do the shoes match up to the occupants? If you've got just a female and some kids, but yet you have 5 pair of adult male shoes, maybe somebody else is living there. So just doing periodic inspections. And then when you do the inspection, obviously you're going to fix whatever is is your responsibility to fix, but you can fix whatever is the tenant's responsibility to fix too, and bill them at that time. Don't push it off until move out and say, I'll just take it out of the deposit. There's no reason to do that. Just bill the tenant for their liability now. It keeps them on track and makes it easier when they do eventually move out, and better ensures that you'll have enough money to pay for whatever damages there are. So better to catch things when they happen. Another thing is not issuing the 5-day quickly. So a lot of landlords I talk to are only issuing a 5-day letter if they intend to take someone to court. Sometimes, you know, you just don't figure that out, and we just do it every single month. So we set a threshold because it is a bit of a pain, but anyone who owes more than $250 automatically gets a letter. Doesn't mean we're necessarily taking them to court. I mean, if they've communicated, we get something happened and we're going to pay you on Thursday, we know we're not going to take them to court, but we still send them a letter. Tenants need to know you're serious. They need to know that rent is a #1 priority. And if they're not getting communication about that, then they're less likely to treat you as a priority in their financial planning.
You've got bills to pay. That's on them. Even if they tell you, that's too bad.
Not using an attorney to obtain a judgment if you plan to use one to do collections. And you know, I used to do a lot of my own court cases. And I now use an attorney for all of my cases, even for my own tenants that I manage, because it's not that expensive. And 95% of the time, the tenant pays the bill anyway. So when we send the file to the attorney, we put the attorney's bill on the tenant ledger. I'm not paying the attorney yet. I pay the attorney in the future, but I'm billing the tenant's ledger at that time. Almost always, the tenant is going to make the full payment before we even go to court. So there's little reason I don't think not to use an attorney. It also frees up your time on the first initial court hearing date. You don't have to go. So the attorney goes. If the tenant doesn't show, you never have to go to court. You get a default judgment. The attorney does all the work for you. You only have to show up if the tenant contests and someone has to testify. So I think using an attorney, especially in our market when they're fairly way inexpensive compared to what I'm hearing from people in other markets, it just makes sense, especially if you're using an attorney that also does collections, because it can go right from your judgment right into collections. And it's seamless. The attorney then is getting a judgment for court costs. And it's a seamless process. So if you're not using an attorney, I would encourage you to. Although I do like showing up in court from an educational standpoint, you always learn what are hot topics by going to court. So it's entertaining and educational to go to court. But I personally use an attorney for all of our cases now. One thing that's really important and that's not done as much with self-managed landlords is having a system to document conversations. We try to have as many conversations in writing as possible. If we make a phone call to a tenant or a tenant calls in, we still want to have that conversation documented. So and I let the tenant know, hey, I just want to document our conversation. If you don't have software you're using where you can enter a note, at least send the tenant an email or a text to say, whatever your primary communication method with them is, to say, I just want to follow up with our conversation in writing, or keep a note in your phone for each address. And when you have a conversation, document it there. Well, that's really important if you end up going to court with this tenant, if the tenant sues you, if you sue the tenant, having the judge always wants to know the dates. So having the date that you had the conversation is important. So have a note, and nobody can, we can't remember. We have busy lives. You can't remember everything. So having a way to document every single conversation is important. Another thing is not having a system to document your tenant charges and payments. And we see this a lot when we take over properties from self-managed landlords. A lot of people you don't have any kind of a system to do a ledger. So even QuickBooks will manage a tenant ledger for you. We'll create the charge. And then when you take the payment, you can apply the charge. Because it's not good enough to know how much the tenant owes. You have to also know what do they owe it for. So if a landlord comes to us and they say, yeah, this person owes me $2,000, we have to be able to figure out how much is for last month's late fee, how much is for last month's rent, how much is for a repair. So there has to be a system to document. Excel is not adequate. It's too hard. So some of the software companies, a lot of people are using Zillow Rent Manager. That allows you to keep track of the tenant's ledger, but being able to print a logical ledger. I was in court a couple weeks ago, and the judge could not make any sense out of the ledger that the landlord turned in. And this was a large landlord, local landlord. But what systems are you guys using to track your rents? Anybody?
We're using Door Loop.
What's that?
I use Building.
Buildium, okay.
I use apartments.com.
Apartments.com?
Yeah.
Okay.
I use Door Loop.
Door Loop? I've not heard of that one. Is that a full management software, or is it just applications and ledgers?
No, it's a full management software.
Okay.
Unfortunately, I don't have, but I think it really is geared toward larger managers, because I don't have an accounting background. So some of the parts are not as easy for me.
That means it's keeping a two ledger. Right. That is probably good, because it's not good that it's confusing, but it's keeping a double entry accounting record. So what's that cost?
I think it's like $169 a month.
Okay. And what are you paying for Buildium, Dina?
I'm paying, I think, about 800 a year,
Okay.
and that I can have up to 40, which I don't have 40, but
Right. That's
It's
good.
just-
Okay.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I use Stessa and I don't pay anything.
Stessa?
Yeah,
STESSA?
correct.
And what does it do?
It does everything that you're talking about. It's I don't pay anything because I don't have a large number of rentals, but I put in there any maintenance, and you can upgrade to where they can send you notes, or they can through that do that. I have other system, but it's pretty simple to use, and
Okay.
I think it's. Whoops, I'm sorry. I think it's definitely good enough for the amount that I have. So if you're new, it'll get you started.
Okay, great. All right. And somebody put a note in the chat about a link to the presentation. I can send it out when we're done. Another mistake, not meeting the state required timeline for deposit dispensation. So we have 45 days from the latter of the lease ending date or the move out date to provide the tenant with the accounting, and if there's money left, a check for the deposit dispensation. And if you miss the 45 days, your ability to withhold from the deposit is waived, and you owe the tenant the whole thing. So it is important. You can, if you are working on something and you can't nail down the contractor price because it's complicated, you can put in writing to the tenant and request a 30-day extension. But if you don't do that and you miss the 45 days, a judge is, and the tenant sues you, the judge is going to make you give the whole deposit back. So make sure on your move outs that you set a calendar reminder so that you get that done before the 45th day. Here's another thing I learned this week that I did not know. So, and it's not really related to the 5-day notice, but we fixed the scenario with the 5-day notice. So in Virginia, if you file an eviction for a tenant, the tenant has a one-time right of redemption that says if they pay everything they owe within 48 hours of the expiration time, you have to cancel the eviction. I thought that was a blanket for every landlord, and it's not. So that one time only applies to landlords with 4 or less properties. And in order to, if you have 4 or less properties, you have to put in writing to the tenant that you are reserving the right to hold them to one time per, it actually says one time per lease term in the law, one time per lease term. You have to put that in writing. If you don't, the tenant has unlimited rights of redemption. So if you have 5 or more rental units, then the tenant doesn't have one time. You have to allow the tenant to redeem every single time you file an eviction. If you have 4 or less, you can reserve the right to allow them just one time per lease term, but only if you put that in writing. So what we did is just add that verbiage into our 5-day notice. So when we send those out, they automatically get that notification. And that way, I mean, some of my landlords qualify for that. Some of them don't. But we just put it in all of them. That says if applicable. So if you have 4 or less, add that verbiage to your 5-day letter so that if you have a problematic tenant who found a way to catch up, but you still, and then, you know, they catch up on November 18th, but then December rent is not paid, you can then file again in December and do an eviction if necessary. We're always learning every day. Another item is when a tenant has something that's a non-financial violation. I've got a military tenant in Portsmouth. He's been there since 2022. We did a drive-by and he had huge, Dina, you saw pictures of this, but huge bags of trash outside of the house. So we did an interior inspection and found there's not a lick of furniture. Now, it doesn't look like anybody lives there, except that it's full of trash. He had one bedroom that was just full of trash bags. And so, you know, for a violation like that, or an extra person, or an unauthorized pet, anything that's non-financial, you have to issue, per Virginia, a 21-day notice to cure the lease violation. And then on the 22nd day, you can reinspect. That tenant did not meet his 21-day notice. And so, you know, we filed an unlawful detainer for non-financial reasons because he's drawing rats and he's ruining my house with trash, just garbage. Thank goodness, I don't know how, it's in Portsmouth, we have not gotten a city violation yet, but we will, I'm sure. Maintenance. The requirement in Virginia is that the tenant submit their move-in inspection report within 5 days. The law does not say that the landlord must provide a move-in inspection report. What we do is we make it the last pages of the lease. It's a blank form. And we write in it, no visible evidence of mold and no visible evidence of bed bug at move-in condition. That way we're establishing that that's the scenario. 90% of the tenants never turn them back in. And so they're confirming that the property was perfect at the time of move-in. If they fill it out and turn it in, that's not a problem. We take it and we put it on record. But it's not our responsibility to go walk the property and jot down every scratch on the woodwork. When a tenant moves in, that's the tenant's responsibility. And documenting no visible evidence of mold and bed bugs is just a CYA as a landlord to confirm that the property did not have them at the time they moved in.
So do we still have to send out that?
Another mistake is a lot of people, when the tenant does turn that in, it's not a work order. Okay. It's just establishing the condition at the time they move in. So it's not, if something is broken, absolutely you want to fix it. You want tenants to be happy, but tenants are renting used properties. They're not renting brand new properties. And just because they put something on a move-in report doesn't mean it's something you need to go and address. You're just establishing the condition at move-in so they are not held responsible for it at move-out. That's the purpose of the report.
Yeah, they don't notice something, but then.
Okay.
Oh.
Another mistake, I believe, is not being thankful when a tenant submits a work order. You see a lot of landlord groups suggesting that landlords charge a minimum fee every time somebody has to go out of the house. The tenant should pay the first $50 or tenant should pay the first $100. But if you do that, the tenants are not going to submit work orders.
Mhm.
And this is your asset. This is your retirement asset. It's $200,000 or $300,000 asset. And do you really want maintenance to go neglected? No, we should be thankful when a tenant submits a work order so that we can keep our properties well maintained and not have deferred maintenance. So be thankful when the tenant submits a work order. Sometimes, it's education, and sometimes it's something that they should be responsible for, and a quick link to a YouTube video to how to unclog a garbage disposal is all they need, rather than sending a plumber. But be thankful when they submit a work order because they are trying to keep our house in good condition, which is what we want. It's tenants who have things falling apart around them and they're afraid to have us come in their house who won't submit a work order. Those are the ones that we need to be concerned about. Not responding to maintenance in a timely manner is a big mistake. Home warranties are notorious for this. We can't, with a home warranty, it's impossible to get vendors out. And then when they do go out, the amount of time to fix issues is unreasonable, in my opinion. So home warranties tend to be very bad for a landlord-tenant relationship. And the number one reason tenants don't renew their leases is because landlords don't take care of property. So being able to respond quickly to whatever the maintenance concern is important. One mistake that people make too is not telling vendors when you launch the vendor, when you call the vendor, specify to the vendor that they should be not talking to the tenant about the issue. They should be talking to you. And they should also, especially if it's a plumbing vendor, they should be documenting what they believe the cause of the issue was. So if they pulled out baby wipes from the pipes, they need to specify that on their invoice so that if you have to hold the tenant liable, you have proof of what the issue was, and it's not based on what the vendor verbally told you. Not knowing what your state requires regarding mold, bed bug, and maintenance. This property manager who called me this week he had a tenant who screamed mold. We have had a lot of mold issues this fall. We had so much water. I have had more air quality test failures in the last 2 months than I've had in my entire career as a landlord. We've had 4. And it's because we had so much rain, you know, it got trapped under the houses and it didn't get dried out. And then next thing you know, you've got a mold situation. But this particular property manager, the tenant is, you know, screaming mold. He sends in a maintenance guy. They've been working on it for 3 weeks, but he never ordered an air quality test. So we generally, if the tenant screams mold, we ask them to send us pictures of any visible evidence. If there is none, usually there isn't. Usually it's just, well, I've just been sick and, you know, my doctor says it could be this. So we say, we'll be happy to send an air quality tester out. But if it comes back normal, you'll be liable for the inspection cost. If it comes back a problem, we will put you in a hotel and get whatever needs to be done remediated. And that's pretty cheap. I use ProCraft inspections. We order right online. It's $275. You know, it's inexpensive. They get it done in 3 or 4 days, and you know exactly if you have a problem or if you don't. You know, it comes back and either says normal or it says problem. If there's a problem, we are required to put the tenant up in alternative housing, which is the piece that this other landlord didn't do, knowing that he had a mold scenario. So you've got to know what the law requires, and the law is very specific regarding both mold and bed bugs as to how the landlord has to respond. Advertising your properties. I don't know if you guys get those, you know, like the Facebook photos of the crazy photos that people have in real estate ads, but it's really important to check your photos after you put, you know, once you put your ad out, go see what it looks like, you know, to make sure that, you know, you're not in the mirror or, you know, just check them to make sure that you have the most appealing picture in the front is the first one, and that all of the photos that are there show a good depiction of your property. You don't have to post every photo just because you have it. I like to have a Google Maps screenshot of my property, so I just pull the address in Google Maps, and I adjust the map size so I get whatever surrounding amenities. I love to have a Navy base in the map if I can get, you know, the Norfolk bases or something in the map, and then do a screenshot. Google allows that as long as you leave the Google logo on the bottom. You can use that as a photo in your ad. I like doing that because it just shows the, you know, the location of the property. But check your photos just to make sure that you have the best one up front. It doesn't have to be the outside of the house. Lots of times your kitchen shot is the best photo to have as your feature photo, your first one. And just make sure that when you launch your ad, your best photos up front and all the photos are show an attractive version of your house. You can also put things like the Fair Housing logo or Equal Opportunity Landlord, something like that, as a photo in your photo grid if you want. It's really important, especially this time of year and as we get into the winter months, to do regular vacant property checks on your properties to make sure you don't have squatters. The number of squatters right now is way on the rise. We have a property in Newport News that fortunately they didn't get in, but steel door, and the whole door frame's broken because they were trying to get in. We have clothing on the porch. I mean, they're still living on the porch, but most of our cities will, the police will pretty easily move people out as long as we can prove that they've been there for less than 30 days. In Norfolk, you have to have no trespass signs up and have your property on the no trespass list with the city, which is a form you have to fill out. The other cities, I haven't had any issue doing that. We just call the police, they walk the property, and if there's people in there, they make them leave. But you do have to establish that they've been there for less than 30 days. If they're there for longer than 30 days, they have squatter rights. So just be checking on them every couple of weeks so that you can make sure that nobody's been there. What are squatter rights? Squatter rights are occupant rights, the same thing as tenants. They're tenants without leases. Which means you would have to give a 5-day notice to Jane Doe or all occupants, file an unlawful detainer, and wait for the sheriff to do a formal eviction if they've been there more than 30 days.
So do you suggest in Norfolk having them fill out the form for the trust?
We fill out the form every year or so. We just fill it out with all our Norfolk properties and send it in. I just do I mean, if you only have a few in Norfolk, you can just fill out one form for each property. I do a mail merge. Just download our properties into Excel and then do a mail merge and send them all in. You have to send them to the city attorney. If you just Google the Norfolk no trespass form, you'll find it. So you have to have that on file and then have a no trespass sign at each entrance. So if you've got a back gate and a front gate, 2 signs. The sign just has to be there when you call the cops though. So if you at least fill out the form, I don't really like, we put up the no trespass sign if we need to call the police.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Signs are controversial. Generally, bad people in the neighborhood are going to know if the property is vacant anyways, but I prefer not to have signs in high crime neighborhoods. Usually they're metal and usually they're stolen by a scrapper anyways. But people these days, even low income, they don't shop for properties by driving around. Everybody's looking for properties on their phone. So I don't find it really beneficial to have signs for rentals anymore. Most agents are putting signs out there for their own, to advertise for clients, not necessarily for renters and buyers. Renters and buyers are all going online. I suggest from a fair housing standpoint to put your rental criteria right in your ads. So ours say qualified applicants will ... and then we do, have 3 times the rent in income, have no more than 2 occupants per bedroom, and just we put our whole list of rental criteria there. That way tenants can self-screen themselves out, hopefully. We don't want to be in the business of just churning rental application fees. We don't want to waste our time with people who don't meet the criteria. And by putting your criteria in the ad, I think it better substantiates that you're treating everybody the same, and just protects you in the event that somebody suggests that you're violating fair housing. So I like putting it in the ad. It saves phone calls, it saves time, and it limits some liability. Using syndication tools. So the way people are finding rental properties now is online. They're using apps, and people are using the weirdest apps that, we've never even heard of necessarily. But the way you get to them is by using a tool, like all the software tools that you guys listed, I would imagine, are syndicating your properties. Zillow will syndicate your properties and so when you syndicate, what that means is that it publishes on all the normal rental websites. It's not going to publish to Facebook Marketplace. It's not going to publish to generally Craigslist. Some of them do to Craigslist. I wouldn't suggest using Craigslist. It's not going to publish to affordablehousing.com, which is where most of the Section 8 tenants are looking, and it's not going to publish to the military website. But other than those, the syndication tools publish pretty much every place you want to go. By far, the majority of leads these days are still coming from Zillow, much as I hate that. They are. Not claiming your properties on sites such as Zillow. Just if you can go out to the websites where the syndication happens, you can generally claim the properties you own, and that will reduce your chances of having them stolen and having scammers use it. Not that that's scamming you, but it is scamming consumers and making it confusing, causing confusion when you have a property for rent, that somebody else has it for rent for $300 less than you. So, claiming them makes it harder for for people to steal them. Zillow will know who to reach out to if there's a question or an issue. We don't ever stop marketing until we have a signed lease. So we require that upon acceptance that the applicant pay the deposit and sign the lease within 48 hours, regardless of what the move-in date is. And once they pay the deposit, we stop showings because we want to stop traffic in the house. But until they sign the lease, we don't pull the ads down because people can be flighty. I just had a military guy yesterday. I reached out. He put his application in, let's say 1 o'clock on Monday, and he didn't give us his order. So we immediately asked for his orders and didn't hear from him. Asked if he, did you change your mind about the property? And this is 20 hours later, he tells me, oh, I've already signed a lease and moved in someplace. People flake out. So until I have one property in Norfolk, beautiful property, right downtown, right next to the brewery, really cool condo that we've accepted 2 people on and strong applicants. And they both just change their mind before they move in. People, there's a lot of property on the market right now and people have choices. And so don't count on it until they've actually signed the lease because you don't want to lose your momentum with your ads. You don't want people to fall out of the boat. So just keep marketing until you have that signed lease. Tenant screening. There's so much fraud going on right now. Make sure you're getting a complete application from every adult because you want to do the credit check and the criminal background check on every adult. You also want the ability, if you are going to need to have multiple adults to garnish from, should you need that, because you never know what's going to happen in the profile. So the only time we don't, if we have this mentally disabled adult, we wouldn't take an application from that person. But with that's the only exception. Other than that, we want an application from every adult, even if they have no income. Not screening every adult. From a criminal background standpoint, you really want to screen every adult, get the application and screen them. It does cost money to screen them, but they should be paying you enough to more than cover the cost of your screening. Another mistake is not rejecting an applicant once you found out they lied on the application. Liar, cheat, or thief. If they're going to lie on your application, they're going to lie to you once they're in your property and they can't pay rent. So validate the information on the application. That's the purpose of getting the application. Then we then validate it. And if they lie on the application, I suggest you deny them. I'm finding people are getting really smart about landlord email addresses. So I don't really rely a lot on landlord verifications because I know landlords can't always be reliable either if they really want a tenant out. But we just had one that it looked like it would be a valid landlord address. I looked up the owner's name, verified that, and it was a variation of the owner's name at gmail.com. Looked legit, but it came back glowing. And then we find out, we didn't know this at the time, but we find out after the fact that like 5 days prior to the landlord filling out this landlord verification, they had filed a warrant in debt on this tenant, which wasn't showing up on the court website yet. We saw it after the fact, and we could tell by the date at the top of it, the date it was filed, it wasn't published in the court record. So obviously the landlord either lied because they really wanted the tenant out, or more likely the tenant created a fake email address and the tenant completed the landlord verification on their own. So people, I don't know. It's the fraud, especially this time of year, is it's disheartening. thing you want to be careful about is having criteria or questions that violate the law. And this is mostly related to, well, criminal and it could be source of income. So if you have more than 4 units in Virginia, you do not want to say no Section 8 in your ad. That would be illegal. No landlords in Virginia, no landlords in the entire country, because this is a HUD standard, should be saying in their ad, no felonies in the last 5 years. You know, that's against the law. A felon is now a protected class. We can use criminal for screening, but we have to have specific guidelines that make sense. So in a multi-unit, it might make sense to you to have a sex offender criteria that you won't accept anyone on the sex offenders list. Personally, what I use is no crimes against property, crimes against people, drug manufacturing, or drug distribution in the last 7 years. That's the only criminal we screen for. But you can use whatever, as long as you do it consistently and it's logical and it makes sense. You can do that. You just can't say no felonies, which I find a little conflicting, considering I do a lot of Section 8, and Section 8 tenants, if they get a felony, any adult in the household gets a felony, they lose their voucher. So why is it that HUD can use the felony standard and landlords cannot? It makes no sense, but that's the law. So just be careful that what you have in your written ads and what you're using as your criteria when people call you and you discuss it verbally, because when you get those phone calls, always assume they're a tester. Always assume they're a tester, and you want to answer and make sure that you are being careful that you follow law. I find I don't ever rely solely on the automated screenings. For some reason, the way our state records feed to the screening companies is not always reliable. And I don't know exactly why, but I've had scenarios, not as many recently, and we moved to a different software platform, and I'm not seeing it recently, but I always manually go and look up tenants on the state website to look for judgments. Well, for one, my screening only looks for landlord judgments. And our criteria cares about all consumer judgments. So I care about judgments from credit card companies, car loan companies, furniture companies, you know, all of those, not just landlord tenant personally, because I see those as a threat to income, and those are creditors that will likely garnish wages. So we don't accept anyone who has delinquent, unpaid judgments or accounts and collections with consumer companies, not just landlords.
Yeah.
And so we use the court website to verify that, and don't just rely on the screening software.
Use court website.
Hey, Patty, question for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, do you still recommend NTN as an option, or is there
Yes.
other ones out there?
Well, I think National Tenant Network is a great screening company if your software that you're using is not offering screening. Mine does, and that screening is owned by me. I don't personally recommend the third-party platforms like Zillow, because Zillow owns that screening. You just get some results of the screening. You don't get the screening. So on my application, my disclosure that the tenant signs at the end says that I can make inquiries and do background checks and credit checks and all those things for purposes of approving the application and enforcing any lease the tenant enters. So I own that screening. I have the data. I have their social security number. I have all of it. So in the event that I have to track the tenant down later, you know, I've got to find them to pursue them for collections, I can just screen them again and find out what their current addresses are, 6 months after they leave my property. I prefer to own the screening. And you do own the screening with National Tenant Network. They're a great screening company. So with verifying income with a third party, people are getting so smart. For $6 or $8, you can buy fake pay stubs, fake bank statements, fake tax returns, fake everything. And they're not always identifiable. So we put right in our criteria that the applicant's income must be validated with a third party. The company we're using is called payscore.com, but there are a couple companies that do this. They charge, the company I'm using charges $10, and we can either pay that or we can have the tenant pay it. In my case, we pay it. We make sure that our application fee will cover both of the screenings. So I do that first. I do that before my credit check because I'm paying a lot more for my credit check. So we do the income screening first. And essentially what that company does, it sends them a link and then they log into their bank accounts and it sucks up their deposit data. And it groups it into two categories, reoccurring and non-reoccurring. Reoccurring would be things like paychecks every 2 weeks, Social Security once a month, things that happen in a pattern. A non-reoccurring would be anything that happened, in a non-pattern, like an IRS refund, Cash App, something like deposit, things like that. So we look at their reoccurring income, and that's a net income. So we require that their gross be 3 times rent, that their net be 2.5 times rent. And basically they still have to provide pay stubs, but we're just validating that the pay stubs they gave us are actually showing up in their bank account. And it's screening out fraud. Taking an out-of-state cosigner. Issue with, I really don't love cosigners. I mean, there are instances where I will take a cosigner, but my cosigner restrictions are really strict. They have to be local because I need to be able to serve them. If there's non-compliance happening, cosigners most of the time don't voluntarily just make a payment. So I don't love them. I always have a conversation with the cosigner first and say, I just want to make sure you understand what this means. This means that if your nephew or grandson loses his job and never gets another job, you're going to be liable for all the lease requirements for the entire year. Are you okay with that? And if they say yes, we require that, one, they be local so we can serve them, and 2, that they have the same income requirement, so 3 times the income of their own housing and the rent they're guaranteeing. So they have to submit a regular rental application. So they submit an application along with the tenant, and we screen them along with the tenant. But usually they own a home, and so we can get that mortgage amount from their credit report. If they rent, you just have to ask them what their rent is and they tell you. And we add those together, and they have to have 3 times both housing expenses. Other property managers I know require 5 times rent for a cosigner. So would it just set your criteria, make it high. And the only thing I will take a cosigner for, I won't take a cosigner for the tenant not having enough income. So I'm not relying on the cosigner to pay rent necessarily. The cosigner is a backup. I will take a cosigner if the tenant has other, like maybe they have garnishment risks. Maybe they owe another landlord, but it's not it's $1,000. It's not a significant amount of money, but I won't accept them without a double deposit or a cosigner. Blemishes on their credit report. Those are things I would consider taking a cosigner for. If the applicant alone doesn't have enough income, that, for my criteria, does not qualify to be approvable with a cosigner. I would have to put somebody on second on a lease. So that's it. That's all we got for today. Who has questions or other things you want to talk about?
Couple things I had
question.
questions about.
Doreen, you want to go?
Yeah, going back to, you said about, not, advertising that you don't take or, Section 8. So if you don't, or when they do call and ask, do you take Section 8, what is your response? What should a
How
response?
many, well, my response is yes, we take Section 8, but
Mhm.
how many units do you own?
I only have one house.
Okay, then if you don't want to take Section 8, my answer would be, I own less than the number of properties in Virginia, so I am exempt from taking Section 8 and I am not accepting it at this time.
Okay.
I'm exempt from being required to take it and I prefer not to at this time.
Okay. Thanks.
I got a question.
Hey, Kathy.
I post my properties on Zillow, like I've got one on there now, and I've gotten some applications back. Should I solely trust the Zillow application and background check, or because I'm a member of a subscriber to National Tenant Network. Should I
tell
guess-
tenants that we won't accept the Zillow application. They have to apply with us.
Okay, then.
That's what I do.
Okay, because sometimes on Zillow, when I see the information come back, like the pay stubs, what you were talking about, they don't look legit to me.
Yeah.
That's
Well,
why I'm
Zillow's not
unsure.
telling you to accept or deny, right? They're just giving you the data.
Yeah.
Right. So it's still your decision. I mean, they would be fake pay stubs whether they were in Zillow or NTN.
Mm-hmm.
That's where the income verifier would help, adding that as a second step.
Payscore.com.
If you go to payscore.com, it's free to sign up. They'll do a little onboarding and they'll ask what your criteria is. What I use is 3 times gross income, 2.5 times net income. So that takes, because all they're looking at is deposits. So, and I like that because that takes into account if they have garnishments or child support or anything like that coming out. We don't really care about that if they have enough income. So I like using net on that. But we just send them a link. I look at their ID, I look at their pay stubs, and I look at the overall application to make sure the move-in date looks great. If all that looks good, just in a real quick glance, the first thing we do is send them the income verification link. And they have to complete that and pass that before I ever pull their credit. And that's only $10. I don't know what everybody's paying. I'm paying $29 to pull credit now. So, I'd rather, if they're going to be denied, I'd rather deny them on the $10 charge than, get to the point that I'm spending $40.
Like that.
Okay.
50.
Patty,
Eight.
can you issue a 5-day notice on email, or do you have to send a post office?
That's a good question. As long as your lease says that both parties agree to use electronic communication for notices, you can do it through email.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Patty, this is Tiffany. Just on piggybacking what you just said, I actually just gained a property with an eviction in progress, and the landlord had sent the pay or quit through the email. But now that we've taken over and we have to see it through the full eviction, our legal team said that emails are not always help, even if the lease says it, it's not always held up in court, to definitely take it, mail it, take a picture of that little slip that says, yes, you mailed it on that day, because that point it is.
I've never seen a judge bring that into question, ever, ever, ever. But I mean, the law says we have to mail them unless your lease allows electronic signature. We do mail them. We mail them and email them.
Yeah.
Just as a caution. But I've never, in one scenario in any city, seen that question by a judge. They just ask for a copy of the letter. They don't ever ask, how was it delivered? Never seen that.
One other thing I wanted to share with everybody is talking about how prevalent fraud is and scamming. I went through the whole process of screening a tenant last month. Everything went well. Photo ID was submitted, everything, pay stubs, verification, great, toured with the person, whatever. Day of getting keys, I get to the property and I have this individual show up, and I looked at the person and I said the name, you know, who the lease was written out to, and the person responded yes. And I was like, you don't, I'm sorry, but yeah, you don't look like your photo ID. She says, I probably because I'm just done up. I've got my hair done and makeup and all of that. So without it just didn't set right in any way. So I said, can you just go ahead and get your ID again? Because again, I had it on my files, what person's name and photo. Long story short, she went to the car, nothing.
She didn't come back?
Well, she sat in the driveway and I finally went out, and she had left nearly $3,000 in money orders, which was, you know, because we specifically say certified check. She shows up with nearly $3,000 in money orders, and I'm like, and she left him in the house. And then anyway, so I go out to the car and, oh yeah, I just can't find it. So anyway, so I clearly did not go through with that, but it was unbelievable. So just talking with my co-owner, we were like, so the head person who had the great credit score in the 700s, the great job, all this, to get this other person in. Now, whether they were going to sublet it or whatever. So we've taken to checking IDs even at key turnover, not just at application, because that was our first experience seeing that. But woo, we dodged a bullet. At least we feel that way.
Yep. Our application software requires, even our showing software requires that they upload a selfie in addition to their ID. And a lot of people get kicked out there, or they deny the identity verification, which we won't go forward without that. I mean, right, people are the level of fraud is just at an all-time high.
Hey, Patty, what kind of identification software do you have? I've never heard of it.
I'm using, the software I'm using is Rentvine. Building might do that, but I don't know. I'm using Rentvine, and Rentvine does that. And Tenant Turner is what we're using for showing software, and they do that as well. Priscilla, do you have a question? You have your hand raised.
Yes, I'm sorry. So I have a question about collections. Is there any limitations in the state that you're aware of? Let's say a tenant is $100 short. Is there any policies in place to say you can file an eviction if they are?
I'm having trouble hearing you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
A little bit. Go ahead.
Okay, I'm sorry. So I was saying that, is there any stipulations in place with the policies for the state that if a tenant is short, let's say $100, or they don't have all of their rent in place, can you still move forward with evictions, or is there a threshold to that amount?
The law says that you have to give them the right of redemption if they have a zero balance within 48 hours of your scheduled eviction time. So they have to have everything paid to zero, including the current rent. It doesn't have anything to do with the judgment amount and the money you took them to court for. All monies owed have to be paid.
All right.
I mean, you can make an exception. I don't know that I would evict over $100, but.
Right. And I know that the reason why I asked is because the management company that is currently managing my property, they said that they don't file if it's less than a certain amount. That's why I was asked.
Okay. I mean, we don't do 5-day pay or quits unless it's over a certain amount either. But that's your preference.
Okay.
I mean, our goal, a landlord's goal, is to have the longest run of uninterrupted rent payments possible. And if you can salvage a tenant who's going through some financial problems and, you know, let them hang in there, you're better off not having a vacancy if you can avoid it. So unless you're upset about non-financial scenarios, like my guy who's living in a house without furniture and just trash. Misha, do you have a question?
Yeah, really simple. Are you gonna send out this, this Zoom link, I guess the recording?
Yeah, I'll send a link.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Patty, you might have already covered this, but if you have less than 4 in an LLC, that is considered less than 4. So
No.
if you have a LLC, if you total, you're saying then.
You have to look at the total. It counts any entity that you have at least 10% ownership in counts towards your total. Sorry, Shirley. We're just held at a higher standard. I mean, to me, the one-time right of redemption really stinks that we could have to be filing every single month. You know, what a waste of time. That the tenant has unlimited rights of redemption, that seems insane.
Thank you.
You're welcome. That it?
Well, Patty, hopefully you can help them change that law for next year.
You know what? That's a good question. I need to find out if it's on anybody's radar screen.
Patty, why did I think it was only once? Did it
I
change?
thought that too, Dina. I thought that,
Okay.
and it came up. The reason it came up for me is that we had already given a right of redemption in August, and Crystal in my office was thinking that we couldn't allow another right of redemption on a different judgment. That we had gotten a new judgment. And I said, no, I don't think so. I think it's one per lease period. So I reached out to Mike Hips just for verification. And he sent me the link that showed the 5 or more. So in my case, my landlord only owned 1 rental property. So we could have, oh, no. But that was when we learned too, we had to give the tenant the disclosure that we wanted to reserve the right to hold them to 1 per lease term. And we hadn't done that. So now we have. So with this month's 5-day letters, we included that verbiage. So, and in her case, we talked the landlord into not evicting anyways, because who wants a vacancy this time of year? And she did pay. She paid in full. So.
Okay. And one other question on the rights and responsibilities. If you're seeing a lease that's coming up for renewal and those dates weren't matching, are you sending them a new?
Yes.
one? Okay. For the new year, for the year that you're.
Yeah, the
renewing. Okay.
one there's in effect right now is dated 2024.
Okay.
All right, you guys, thank you very much. We'll see you all in January.
Thank you.
All right, bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Patty, always.
Welcome. Thank you.